Kale had served the Alpha King Arian faithfully for more than a decade. Every battle he fought, every strategy he planned had been for the glory of the kingdom and the protection of the king he admired more than anyone else. He had walked beside Arian through storms of war, through treacherous politics, and through nights filled with secrets that only the closest of friends could understand. Kale had believed that the bond between them was unbreakable, stronger than steel and deeper than loyalty itself. But loyalty, Kale would soon learn, was not always enough. It began on the morning of the summer council, when the sun poured gold across the marble halls of the Alpha Castle. The scent of jasmine and burning torches filled the air as nobles and warriors gathered for what was meant to be a celebration of the kingdom's unity. Kale arrived early, as always, his armor polished to a mirror shine, his sword at his side, and his mind alert to any threat. Yet something in the air felt wrong. A hush moved through the grand hall like a warning whispered by the stones themselves. Arian entered shortly after, his crown gleaming, his cloak flowing like midnight water. He smiled at Kale, a small smile, one that Kale had come to treasure, thinking it meant understanding, trust, perhaps even something unspoken that words could never capture. Kale returned the smile with the same warmth, but inside, unease crept along his spine. Then she appeared. Leora. Kale's closest friend since childhood, the one he had trained beside, laughed beside, and confided in when the world felt too heavy. She walked into the hall with grace, wearing a gown that shimmered like moonlight on water, her eyes bright with something Kale could not name. As she reached the throne, Arian knelt before her, placing a hand over hers. The nobles around them whispered in awe, but Kale could not hear them. All he could hear was the silence in his chest, the sharp twist of betrayal that struck without warning. "You are to be my queen," Arian said, his voice calm, certain, proud. Kale's world tilted. He felt the ground shift beneath him as if the castle itself had betrayed him. Arian had chosen Leora. The person Kale had trusted more than anyone, the one who had shared his dreams and secrets, was now the one the king loved, while he, Kale, was left to step back into the shadows. The hall seemed to close around him, the murmurs of the nobles turning into a distant hum, his hands clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, but it was not anger. It was heartbreak. He had lost more than a title, more than a place at the king's side. He had lost the one person he thought he could never lose. Kale did not speak. He could not. He turned, bowing once to Arian and Leora, though his mind screamed against it. His cloak swished behind him as he left the hall without another word. The echoes of his boots against the marble floors felt like the final drumbeat of a life he had once known. Outside the castle, the kingdom stretched endlessly, fields and forests bathed in morning light. Kale walked without direction, each step heavy with grief and confusion. His mind replayed every memory of laughter, of battles fought side by side, of nights where Arian had trusted him with everything. How had it all ended like this? How could he be replaced so easily, so completely? He found himself at the edge of the cursed wilds, a forest spoken of in fearful whispers, trees twisted like frozen flames, their leaves silver in the sunlight, their shadows long and haunting. Legend said that the wilds were alive, that they tested the hearts of those who dared enter. Most who ventured too far never returned. Kyle did not care. Perhaps it was the curse of the forest that called to him, offering a place where he could be alone with his thoughts, away from the betrayal that burned hotter than fire. As he entered, the air grew colder, the sounds of the kingdom fading behind him. Here there were no nobles, no laughter, no music, only the rustle of leaves and the whispers of the wind. Kale felt the weight of the world lift slightly, replaced by a strange sense of clarity. He had nothing now, no place at the castle, no love returned, no path laid before him. Yet there was freedom in the emptiness, freedom and perhaps opportunity. For days, Kale wandered through the forest, surviving on his skill, his knowledge, and the instinct that had kept him alive on countless battlefields. He trained himself in silence, refining his reflexes, testing his endurance, and listening to the strange magic that seemed to hum through the roots and stones. He learned to move unseen, to strike without hesitation, and to feel the heartbeat of the forest as if it were his own. At night, he dreamt of Arian, not the king who had abandoned him, but the boy he had known, the friend who had laughed with him, shared stories with him, and once, long ago, trusted him with his heart in the quiet moments when no one else was watching. The dreams were both a comfort and a torment. They reminded Cale of what he had lost and fueled the fire within him, a fire that would not be snuffed out by betrayal or heartbreak. On the seventh night, Cale stumbled upon an ancient stone altar, half hidden by ivy and moss. Its surface was etched with runes that pulsed with faint otherworldly light. As he approached, a voice echoed in his mind, not words spoken aloud, but a resonance that thrummed through his chest. Power is never given. It is earned. Through shadow, through pain, through the courage to face what was lost. Cale's hands touched the cold stone and he felt a surge of energy, raw and demanding. It was tempting, terrifying, and intoxicating all at once. The voice did not lie. He could feel strength filling him, a strength that could bend the world to his will. But with it came a warning. Nothing in this power came without cost. To take it fully was to surrender part of himself to the shadows, to walk a path from which there might be no return. Cale did not hesitate. Not now. Not after everything he had lost. He closed his eyes, letting the energy flow into him, letting the forest itself bind him to its strange magic. Pain shot through his body, testing his resolve, his endurance, his very spirit. And through the pain, Cale felt clarity. He would not remain a shadow. He would return. He would fight. He would reclaim what had been taken from him. Not just the king's favor, but the bond that had once been unbreakable. When he opened his eyes, the forest seemed different. Darker, yes, but sharper, clearer. Every leaf, every branch, every whisper of wind was alive with meaning. Cale felt his senses sharpen, his muscles taut with new power, his mind burning with determination. He would not run from what had broken him. He would face it and he would overcome it. Yet as the moon rose high above the twisted trees, Cale sensed a presence. Something unseen, watching, waiting. A figure from the shadows stepped forward, cloaked in black, face hidden beneath a hood. Its voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of inevitability. You have taken the first step, warrior. The path ahead will demand more than strength. It will demand heart, sacrifice, and courage, the likes of which you have never known. Are you ready? Cale's jaw tightened, his eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. He had no choice now. His past had been shattered. His heart had been abandoned. But the fire inside him would not be extinguished. I am ready, he said, his voice steady, carrying the weight of every loss, every betrayal, and every dream that had been denied. The figure inclined its head, vanishing into the darkness as silently as it had come. And in that moment, Cale understood the truth. The road ahead would not be easy. Shadows would test him, enemies would strike, and the bonds he cherished most might demand the greatest sacrifices. Yet for the first time since his exile, Cale felt the stirrings of hope. He was no longer just a discarded warrior. He was something more, a force awakened, forged in loss and tempered by fire. As dawn broke over the twisted canopy of the cursed wilds, Cale lifted his gaze toward the distant horizon, where the golden spires of the Alpha Castle gleamed far away. He did not yet know how he would reclaim what was lost. He only knew one thing: he would not fail. Not this time. And somewhere deep in the shadows of the forest, a whisper followed him, a promise and a warning entwined. The king will remember, and the heart that was abandoned will rise. The forest of the cursed wilds had a life of its own. Cale moved among twisted trees and silver leaves with the grace of a shadow. Every step careful, every breath measured. The power he had claimed at the ancient altar had changed him. His senses were sharper, his reflexes faster, and his strength greater than he had ever imagined. Yet with every pulse of newfound power came a whisper of warning. It demanded control, discipline, and endurance. The days blurred together as Cale trained. He ran along hidden paths that wound through the forest, leaping over gnarled roots and jagged stones, feeling the pulse of life in every leaf and blade of grass. He practiced with his sword, striking trees, rocks, and the shadows themselves, each movement honed to perfection. But the most difficult battles were not with weapons, they were within him. Every night, when the moon rose high above the forest canopy, Cale would dream of Arian. Sometimes the dreams were gentle, filled with laughter and shared victories, with memories of moments that had once felt infinite. Other times the dreams twisted into taunting shadows, Arian smiling at Leora, laughing with her as Cale's absence went unnoticed, the warmth of their bond pressing against the hollow ache in his chest. Each dream left Cale restless, torn between anger and longing, between revenge and the hope of reconciliation. One night, as Cale sharpened his sword under the glow of moonlight, he felt a presence behind him. He spun around, blade at the ready, but saw no one. Only the shadows shifted unnaturally, moving as if they had a life of their own. From the darkness, a voice emerged, not loud, not commanding, but calm and measured. "You move with strength, but your heart is divided," the voice said. Cale tightened his grip on his sword. "Who's there?" A figure stepped from the shadows, cloaked in deep black, face hidden beneath a hood. Cale could feel the power radiating from this presence, a force as ancient as the forest itself. "The Shadow Warden," the figure said. "I have watched you. The altar has chosen you, but the path ahead is not given. It must be earned. Shadow alone is not enough. Heart must follow." Cale's eyes narrowed. "I have already sacrificed everything. What more do you demand?" "Control, understanding, sacrifice beyond what you imagine," the warden replied. "You will be tested in body, mind, and spirit. Only then will you be ready to face what you lost." Kyle hesitated, then nodded. The path before him was not one he could refuse. He had already lost too much to turn back now. The days became grueling. The Shadow Warden pushed Cale harder than any battle he had ever fought. He was forced to climb cliffs that seemed impossible, swim across rivers icy enough to freeze his bones, and meditate under the ancient trees, while the forest whispered truths he did not want to hear. Yet each challenge strengthened him, teaching him patience, resilience, and the subtle control of the power coursing through his veins. During one particular night, Cale faced a trial unlike any before. The forest itself seemed to come alive, the shadows twisting into figures from his past. He saw Arian laughing with Leora, saw himself left behind, heard the whispers of nobles mocking his absence. Cale fought against the shadows, swinging his sword at shapes that dissolved into smoke with each strike. Every swing, every movement tested his strength and his will. But then the whispers changed. They were no longer mocking, they were questioning. "Do you hate him, Cale?" one shadow asked, the voice eerily like Arian's. Cale faltered, feeling a cold ache in his chest. I don't know," he admitted aloud. I just want what I lost. I want what we had." The shadows paused, and then slowly they bowed, disappearing into the wind. Cale realized the warden was right. Strength alone would not restore what was gone. He needed clarity, forgiveness, and courage. Not just for battle, but for his own heart. Over the following weeks, Cale's training shifted. He began learning to channel his shadow power with precision, not merely force. He practiced patience, understanding, and restraint. He trained in silence, feeling the forest as a living teacher, learning to sense danger, to move unseen, and to strike with purpose rather than anger. His heart, once heavy with betrayal, slowly hardened into resolve, tempered by wisdom and endurance. Yet even in the isolation of the wilds, Cale could not escape thoughts of the Alpha Kingdom. He thought of Arian not as a king, but as the boy he had once known, the friend who had laughed with him, trusted him, and confided in him. He thought of Leora, of her gentle smile and quick mind, of the bond she had once shared with him. Cale realized that to reclaim what he had lost, he would need to face them both, not with anger or revenge, but with strength tempered by heart and purpose. It was during one quiet night, when the stars were bright and the forest was still, that Cale heard a whisper on the wind. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it carried with it a warning and a promise. "The world you left behind has changed," the voice said. "The king will not wait. Shadows are stirring. When you return, you will find a kingdom on the edge of war, and hearts that may not remember you. Be ready." Kyle clenched his fists, feeling the pulse of power in his veins, the fire of determination in his chest. He had grown stronger than he had ever imagined. He had trained harder than any warrior in the kingdom, and he had faced his own heart, confronting the pain of betrayal and the longing that refused to die. "I am ready," he whispered to himself, his voice steady and unwavering. "I will not fail." The following days were spent in preparation for the journey back. Cale sharpened his sword, honed his skills with bow and arrow, and practiced moving silently through the forest. He studied the paths, the rivers, and the hidden trails that would allow him to approach the kingdom unseen. Every detail mattered. Every decision could be the difference between success and disaster. On the eve of his departure, the Shadow Warden appeared once more, standing silently among the trees. Cale approached, bowing slightly. "You have learned much," the warden said, voice calm but firm. But remember this: power is meaningless without purpose. The heart guides the hand, and courage guides the heart. The choices you make when you return will define not just the kingdom, but who you are. Be mindful. Cale nodded, feeling the weight of the words settle in his chest. He had trained for months in the shadow of betrayal and the whisper of magic. He had faced his fears, his desires, and his regrets. Now he would return not as the discarded warrior, but as someone who could shape destiny itself. As dawn broke over the twisted canopy of the wilds, Cale took a final look at the altar where his journey had begun. The sun glinted off the runes carved into the ancient stone, their magic faint but enduring. He felt a sense of resolve unlike anything he had ever known. The path ahead would not be easy. Arian would not welcome him back without question. Leora might resist the change that Cale represented, and the kingdom itself would test him in ways he could not yet imagine. But Cale no longer feared those trials. He had faced the shadows, conquered his own doubts, and embraced the power within. With one last deep breath, Cale stepped onto the hidden trail that would lead him back to the Alpha Kingdom. Each step was filled with purpose, each heartbeat steady and strong. The whispers of the forest faded behind him, replaced by the distant call of the kingdom he had once loved and still longed for. And as he walked, a shadow moved silently among the trees, watching, waiting. The voice that had guided him from the beginning whispered again, softer this time, almost like a promise. The king will remember, and the heart that was abandoned will rise. Cale's lips curved into a faint smile, not of victory but of determination. The battle for what he had lost had begun, and this time he would not be defeated. The road back was long, the dangers many, but Cale felt alive in a way he never had before. Every challenge, every shadow, every memory of betrayal had forged him into something more than a warrior. He was ready to fight not just for the kingdom, but for the heart he had once thought lost forever. And in the distance, beyond the forests and rivers, the golden spires of the Alpha Castle shimmered in the sunlight. Waiting, Cale tightened his grip on his sword, feeling the power, the hope, and the courage that burned inside him. He was ready. The kingdom, the king, and the truths of the heart would soon confront him, and Cale would meet them stronger than ever. Cale moved through the forest near the kingdom like a shadow. Months of training had honed his body, sharpened his mind, and strengthened his resolve. He had faced the wilderness, the whispers of magic, and the trials of his own heart. Now the time had come to return, not as the discarded warrior, but as someone who could claim his place again, someone who had the power to shape destiny. He approached the outer walls of the Alpha Kingdom at dawn. The golden spires of the castle glimmered in the morning light, familiar yet distant, like a memory he had long feared to revisit. Guards patrolled the ramparts, but Cale's movements were precise and silent. He slipped past them unseen, through narrow paths only a shadow could follow. Every step carried the weight of months spent in solitude, every heartbeat echoing the fire of determination within him. The castle had changed since his departure. The courtyards buzzed with activity, the banners of the Alpha King waving proudly in the wind. But beneath the surface, Cale could sense tension. Whispers of unrest lingered in the air, subtle shifts in loyalty among the nobles. A quiet unease that even Arian could not hide. Cale felt a chill run through him, knowing that the kingdom he had loved was not as safe or as stable as he had believed. He reached the palace gardens at twilight, where the air was cool and fragrant with the scent of blooming flowers. This was a place he had walked often with Arian, sharing quiet conversations, laughter, and dreams. Now it felt foreign, yet achingly familiar. Cale's eyes scanned the shadows, alert for any sign of threat or recognition. Then he saw them. Arian and Leora stood together beneath the silvered branches of an ancient tree, their conversation quiet, yet carrying the subtle weight of power and authority. Arian's posture was that of a king, proud and confident, but Cale noticed the faint tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers twitched as if restraining something unspoken. Leora's gaze was thoughtful, her expression calm yet watchful, as though she sensed something approaching. Cale felt the old ache in his chest, the mixture of longing and anger that had driven him to the forest months ago. Yet he did not move forward recklessly. He would observe first, understand the dynamics of the court in his absence, and find the moment to act, not with rashness, but with the precision and strength he had gained. For days, Cale watched from the shadows, learning the rhythms of the palace and the people within. He observed Arian's interactions with his council, noting the strain beneath the king's confident exterior. He saw Leora advising wisely, her presence a stabilizing force, yet also sensing her subtle curiosity about the man who had returned silently from exile. Cale's heart wavered. The connection he had once shared with Arian had not disappeared. Each glance, each gesture between the king and his friend reminded Cale of what had been stolen, or perhaps what had been lost through fear and misunderstanding. The power he had gained in the forest was important, yes, but it was not the key to reclaiming what mattered most. That would require courage, honesty, and the patience to navigate the delicate balance of hearts and loyalties. One evening, Cale found himself in the shadow of the Grand Hall, observing Arian as he reviewed strategies for an upcoming border conflict. The king's focus was intense, yet there was a hint of weariness beneath it, a shadow Cale knew all too well. Cale remembered the nights they had spent planning battles side by side, the quiet trust that had existed between them. That trust had been broken, yet Cale felt that it could be mended, if approached carefully. Cale decided to make his presence known in small ways. He left subtle signs of his skill and power, unseen by most but noted by those who were aware. Messages delivered with precision, interventions in minor disputes that revealed a hand stronger than any common warrior. Whispers began to circulate among the nobles. A shadow moves in the palace, unseen yet undeniably present, someone capable of both power and subtlety. Leora was the first to sense him. One night in the library, she felt a shift in the air, a disturbance almost imperceptible. Her instincts, honed by years of observing Cale, told her that he was near. She did not speak, but her eyes narrowed thoughtfully, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She had always understood him in ways others could not. The first encounter was subtle, almost accidental. Cale was in the garden, testing the movement of shadows against the light of the moon. Leora appeared, and for a moment neither spoke. They regarded each other silently, recognition and surprise flickering in their eyes. "You've changed," Leora said finally, her voice calm but curious. Cale nodded. "I have had time to learn, and to grow." There was a tension in the air, a silent acknowledgement of past bonds and present changes. Leora studied him for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Be careful," she said. "The king is under pressure and not all eyes are friendly. You must tread wisely," Cale understood. His return was not just a personal journey. It was a test of patience, intelligence, and control. He could not rush forward with emotion. The kingdom, the king, and even Leora's perceptions were delicate, requiring careful steps. Over the next several days, Kyle began subtly influencing events within the castle. He helped resolve disputes between nobles, intercepted messages of rebellion before they could cause harm, and quietly demonstrated his skill in ways that drew the attention of Arian. The king, though unaware of Cale's full presence, sensed the subtle changes around him and could not ignore them. Whispers reached Arian's ears of a figure moving unseen, yet wielding power and precision unlike anyone he had encountered. Finally, the moment of confrontation arrived. Arian, walking in the moonlit garden, sensed the presence before he saw it. Shadows shifted and Cale stepped forward, visible at last. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words, past regrets, and the tension of months spent apart. "Kyle," Arian said, his voice steady but layered with surprise and a flicker of emotion he did not attempt to hide. "Your Majesty," Kyle replied, his tone respectful yet firm. "I have returned." Arian's eyes searched him, noticing the changes in posture, strength, and presence. "You have grown, in ways I did not expect." There was pride there, yes, but also an acknowledgement of past failures, both of trust and understanding. Cale stepped closer, measuring each movement. "I have returned for what was lost, not to challenge, but to protect, and perhaps to restore what should have never been broken." Arian's expression softened, a flicker of the bond they had shared years ago returning in his gaze. "Then you must prove it, not just to me, but to the kingdom, and to yourself," Kyle nodded. The words were a challenge, but also an invitation. He had trained for this moment, faced his inner shadows, and now stood ready to reclaim his place, not through recklessness, but with precision, courage, and wisdom. As they spoke, Leora emerged from the shadows, watching the exchange. She felt the weight of history and emotion between the two men, understanding the depth of their connection, Yet she remained silent, recognizing that this was a moment that must unfold naturally without interference. The garden was still, the moonlight casting long shadows across the stone paths. Kyle, Arian, and Leora formed an unspoken triangle of tension, loyalty, and potential reconciliation. Each knew the path forward would not be simple. There would be challenges, dangers, and tests of character. But the first step had been taken, the recognition of presence, power, and the enduring bond that neither betrayal nor absence could fully erase. That night, as Kale left the garden, he felt a stirring in the air, a sense that forces both seen and unseen were observing his return. Somewhere beyond the walls of the castle, whispers of rebellion and the stirrings of magical currents began to converge, signaling that the kingdom was not only aware of Kale's presence, but that his return might change the course of destiny itself. Kale's thoughts returned to Arian. The king had abandoned him once, not out of malice but from choice and circumstance. Now the roles had shifted. Kale had grown stronger, wiser, and more capable than he had ever imagined. The path ahead would test him, but he was ready. And as dawn approached, painting the spires of the Alpha Castle in pale gold, Kale made a silent promise to himself. He would not be a shadow. He would not be ignored. He would fight, not with hatred but with the courage, wisdom, and strength that had been forged in the darkest of trials. The battle for what was lost had begun, and somewhere, in the quiet of the castle night, a distant figure observed the returning warrior, a hint of recognition and curiosity in their eyes, as if destiny itself was preparing for the storm to come. The days after Kale's return were filled with tension and silent calculations. The Alpha Castle seemed to notice his presence in ways both subtle and undeniable. Servants whispered of the shadow moving through the halls. Nobles exchanged cautious glances, and Arian felt the weight of Kale's return like a quiet storm pressing against the edges of his authority. Kale did not seek confrontation, yet he could not remain invisible. He began aiding the people of the kingdom, quietly intervening where danger or injustice arose. A dispute between two minor lords was settled with Kale's subtle guidance. A small band of rebels planning to disrupt the marketplace was intercepted without fanfare. Every action was precise, controlled, and deliberate, designed to protect the kingdom while leaving Arian to discover the presence of someone who had changed. Grown and returned stronger than ever, Arian watched. The king felt both relief and unease. Relief that the kingdom was being protected by someone he had once trusted completely, and unease because he could no longer predict Kyle. The bond between them, once simple and clear, now carried layers of complexity. Arian's mind wrestled with feelings he had never allowed himself to name. Emotions he could not ignore even as the responsibilities of the crown pressed upon him. Leora observed too, silently, her own mind turning with thoughts she had never admitted. Kale had returned with power, yes, but more importantly, with purpose and heart. She had seen loyalty, sacrifice, and courage carved into his every action, and yet the unspoken tension between him and Arian was palpable. She wondered if hearts could truly find their way back after so much absence, after so much betrayal. One evening, Kale encountered Arian in the castle's training yard. The moon hung low, casting silver light on polished stone and the quiet flutter of banners. Arian was practicing with his sword, movements precise but lacking the wild edge Kale had learned to harness in the forest. Kale stepped into the light, letting the moon reveal his presence. Arian's sword froze mid-swing, his gaze lifting to meet Kyle's. Neither spoke at first, letting the silence carry the weight of months apart. "You've changed," Arian said finally, lowering his sword but keeping his posture guarded. Kale nodded, though his own voice carried calm determination rather than apology or accusation. "I have had time to learn, time to grow. I have returned not to challenge but to restore what was lost, if it can be restored." Arian studied him for a long moment. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, replaced by something he could not name. Recognition, perhaps, or the memory of trust long buried beneath the weight of duty. "It will not be easy," Arian said. "The kingdom is on edge. Nobles question authority. Forces gather beyond our borders, and you are no longer the man I once knew." Kyle smiled faintly, the shadows of his training showing in the calm control of his stance. "No, I am stronger, wiser, and I am ready for what comes." They sparred that night, not with hostility, but with the silent communication of skill and trust. blades clashed under moonlight, each movement testing strength, strategy, and precision. Yet beneath the rhythm of attack and defense, an unspoken connection pulsed between them. Memories of the past intertwined with the present, the old bond slowly rekindling as they moved with the awareness of shared history and unbroken trust. Afterward, they sat by the fountain in the courtyard, breathing heavy in the cool night air. Kale studied Arian's profile, seeing the weight of kingship etched into the lines of his face. "You have carried much," Kyle said softly. "Perhaps more than you realize." Arian looked at him, eyes searching. "And you? You left, walked into the shadows, and returned. Changed. Are you still the same Kale I trusted?" Kale's gaze was steady. "I am still the one who would stand by you, protect this kingdom, and fight for what matters. But I am no longer the one who waits silently. I am ready to act." Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden arrival of a messenger from the northern borders. Word had come of a growing rebellion, a force gathering at the edges of the kingdom. Villages had been raided, crops burned, and the people were frightened. The Alpha Kingdom, once secure, now teetered on the brink of chaos. Arian rose, his expression hardening as the responsibilities of leadership took hold. "This is why you have returned," he said almost to himself. "Not for revenge, not for pride, but for the kingdom itself." Kale nodded. "Yes, and I will not fail. Together we can protect what is ours, restore the order that has been shaken, and prove that loyalty is not so easily broken." Leora arrived soon after, her presence calm but commanding. She had followed the discussion quietly, sensing the tension and potential in Kale's return. "You have both changed," she said. "The path ahead will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine. You must trust one another and trust yourselves if the kingdom is to survive." Kyle and Arian exchanged a look, the unspoken history between them carrying weight and meaning. They had been torn apart by choice and circumstance, but now faced the need to reconcile personal emotions with duty. It was a delicate balance. One misstep could lead to disaster both politically and personally. In the days that followed, Kale worked alongside Arian and Leora, combining strength, strategy, and insight. Kale's presence was felt in every decision, every battle plan, and every act of protection for the people. Arian, though cautious, began to rely on Kale once more, recognizing the value of the bond they had shared and the wisdom he now carried. Yet the shadows were not idle. Whispered threats reached Kale's ears, hints of dark forces manipulating unrest within the kingdom. Sorcery of a subtle, dangerous kind had begun to stir, threads of magic entwined with politics and ambition. Kale realized that his fight would not only be against external enemies, but against the unseen forces that sought to destabilize everything the kingdom held dear. One evening, Kale was walking along the outer ramparts, the wind strong against his face when he sensed a presence. Shadows gathered unnaturally, coiling and twisting in ways that felt deliberate, intelligent, and dangerous. Kale's muscles tensed, his senses alert. The air hummed with energy, a warning that the trials were far from over. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, cloaked, with a presence that radiated authority and danger. Kale recognized the threat instantly. This was not a mere rebel or ambitious noble. This was a master of subtle, dark sorcery, someone who had been orchestrating the unrest from behind the veil. "You have returned," the figure said, voice smooth yet sharp, carrying a threat beneath the words. "Stronger than before, yes. But do you think strength alone can change the fate of a kingdom? Of hearts?" Kale's hand rested on his sword, his stance calm but ready. "Strength alone is not enough," he said evenly. "But courage, loyalty, and heart, those can never be defeated." The figure's laugh was low and echoing like wind through empty halls. "We shall see," it said, vanishing into the shadows as silently as it had appeared. Kale exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the warning settle in his chest. The kingdom faced enemies both seen and unseen. Arian's life, the people's safety, and the delicate bonds of trust and love were all at stake. Kale's resolve hardened further. He had trained, endured, and returned for this moment. He would not fail. As he descended the ramparts, the first light of dawn broke over the kingdom. The spires shone golden in the morning, and the city stirred with life. Kale felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had reclaimed his place, but the trials ahead would demand every skill, every ounce of wisdom, and every heartbeat of courage. And in the quiet of the palace gardens, Arian and Leora watched him from a distance, understanding that the return of the discarded warrior had shifted the balance, not just of power but of hearts. The kingdom was no longer the same. Kale was no longer the same. And the next challenge, the one that would test loyalty, courage, and love, was waiting just beyond the horizon. The northern wind howled across the kingdom, carrying with it the scent of fire and the distant cries of conflict. Kale stood atop the battlements, the weight of months of training, planning, and emotional struggle pressing against his shoulders. The forces that had gathered at the borders were unlike any simple rebellion. They were cunning, organized and guided by dark magic. Arian approached, armor gleaming in the pale morning light, his expression both resolute and uneasy. "This is the test," the king said quietly. "The kingdom, our people, and everything we hold dear. We face not only enemies of steel but enemies of shadow and ambition." Kale nodded, feeling the power within him pulse, steady and sure. "Then we will face them together. The kingdom will not fall, and neither will trust between us if we stand as one." Leora joined them, her presence calm but commanding. "You have both grown," she said. "And you must remember, courage is not only in the battlefield. It is in the decisions we make, in the hearts we protect. Kale, your return was not just a fight. It was to restore balance, to remind the kingdom of loyalty and love that do not vanish." Kale met her gaze, feeling the weight of her wisdom. He had learned it in the forest, through trials and solitude. But hearing it from someone he trusted reinforced his purpose. "I understand," he said, "and I will not fail." The battle began at dawn. From the high walls, Kale and Arian watched the advancing forces, soldiers clad in dark armor, banners marked with sigils that shimmered with arcane energy. The clash was inevitable. Kale descended into the fray first, moving like a shadow among enemies. His sword struck with precision, each blow controlled, each movement purposeful. The soldiers, though numerous, could not match the combination of Kale's skill and the magical enhancements he had learned to wield in the forest. Shadows shifted around him, not only as a defense but as a weapon, confounding those who sought to strike him down. Arian fought beside him, commanding the loyal soldiers with the strength of leadership and the tactics of a seasoned king. The synergy between Kale and Arian was undeniable. They moved as one, a blend of trust, instinct, and years of shared history. The soldiers under their command found courage in their leaders, fighting with renewed determination. Leora stayed at the command center, guiding reinforcements, reading the movements of the enemy, and ensuring that the kingdom's defenses held firm. Her intelligence and calm presence kept the front lines from faltering, and her awareness of Kale and Arian's capabilities allowed her to direct forces strategically. The battle raged throughout the day. Kale faced enemy commanders infused with dark magic, forces that had once seemed unbeatable. But every trial in the forest, every moment of discipline and control, every night spent reconciling his heart with his purpose, now bore fruit. Kale struck with precision, disarmed opponents, and protected the vulnerable. Each victory was hard-won, but it strengthened his resolve and demonstrated the power of courage tempered by heart. At the height of the battle, Kale encountered the figure who had orchestrated much of the unrest, a sorcerer cloaked in black, eyes glowing with power and malice. The air around them crackled with energy as shadows and light collided. "You have returned," the sorcerer hissed, voice dripping with dark amusement. "But do you think you can protect what is lost? The kingdom, the hearts, the king himself, all will fall to shadows." Kale's gaze was steady, his hand firm on his sword. Shadows alone cannot conquer what is defended by loyalty, courage, and love. The clash was fierce. Magic and steel collided in bursts of light and shadow. Kale relied not only on strength, but on the wisdom and control he had gained in the forest. Every movement was precise, every strike calculated. The sorcerer underestimated the combination of Kale's skill, insight, and determination. In the end, Kale's sword found its mark, breaking the dark enchantment that had driven the rebellion and shattering the sorcerer's hold on the forces at the borders. With the enemy commander defeated, the remaining soldiers fled, their morale shattered, leaving the kingdom's borders secure once more. Kale stood amidst the battlefield, breathing heavily, the adrenaline of victory mixing with relief. Arian approached, placing a hand on Kale's shoulder. "You have done more than I imagined," he said, voice filled with respect and something deeper, unspoken. "You have not only returned, but you have restored the strength of this kingdom, and the bond we once shared." Kyle met his gaze, emotions welling up but held in check by discipline. "We fought together, as we always should have," he said. "The past cannot be erased, but it can guide us to something stronger." Leora came forward, her eyes bright with pride and understanding. "The kingdom is safe thanks to both of you. And perhaps something more has been restored as well." Arian looked at Kale, his expression softening in a way he had not allowed himself before. "I abandoned you once," he admitted, voice quiet. "Not from lack of care, but from fear and circumstance. I see now. My mistakes, my blindness. You have shown strength, courage, and loyalty that cannot be ignored. I'm grateful you returned." Kale's chest tightened with emotion. The anger, the betrayal, the longing, all had led to this moment. "I did not return for gratitude," Kyle said, his voice calm but firm. "I returned for the kingdom, and to reclaim what truly matters: trust, loyalty, and the bonds that cannot be broken." Arian's eyes softened further, the distance of months spent apart dissolving in the quiet intensity of shared understanding. "Then let us rebuild," he said. "Not just the kingdom, but the bond between us, and the trust that should never have faltered." The three of them, Kale, Arian, and Leora, stood together as dawn broke fully over the kingdom, golden light spilling across the spires and banners. The battle was won, but the real victory was deeper. The restoration of loyalty, the courage to forgive and trust again, and the renewal of bonds that had been thought broken forever. In the days that followed, Kale became a figure of both respect and admiration within the kingdom. Nobles who had doubted him learned of his skill, wisdom, and unwavering loyalty. The people saw a protector who had endured trials, faced betrayal, and returned stronger, ready to defend and guide them. Arian and Kale rebuilt their friendship, now tempered with maturity and understanding. They trained together, strategized together, and shared moments of quiet reflection, recognizing that the connection they had once thought lost had evolved into something even stronger. Leora remained the steadfast guide and observer, supporting both men with her wisdom and insight. Her presence ensured that the kingdom not only survived, but thrived under the leadership of those who had learned the value of courage, loyalty, and heart. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kale stood on the balcony of the Alpha Castle, gazing out over the kingdom he had fought to protect. The wind carried the scent of flowers and the distant sounds of life returning to normal. He felt a deep sense of peace tempered by the knowledge that vigilance was eternal, but strengthened by the certainty that he had reclaimed his purpose, his honor, and the bonds that truly mattered. Arian joined him silently, standing side by side. "You have done more than reclaim what was lost," he said quietly. "You have shown me what it means to fight with heart, to endure, and to return stronger. I am proud, and I'm glad you're here." Kale nodded, feeling the warmth of recognition and friendship, the quiet relief that years of separation and trials had brought them to this moment. "And I am glad I returned," Kyle replied. "Not just for the kingdom, but for this. For us." The stars began to shine in the night sky, reflecting the hope and resilience that now illuminated the Alpha Kingdom. Shadows still existed in the world, and challenges would come again. But for the first time, Kale felt a certainty that he could face anything. Not alone, but with those he trusted, with loyalty guiding him, and with a heart that had endured, learned, and emerged stronger than ever. And as the moon rose high above the castle, casting silver light across stone and garden, Kale, Arian, and Leora stood together, guardians of the kingdom, of each other, and of the bonds that could never be broken. The past had shaped them, the trials had tested them, and the future, bright, uncertain, and full of possibility, awaited them together. The fight for what was lost had ended, but the story of loyalty, courage, and enduring friendship had only begun.